Imagine a Tuesday morning where the only thing you expected to bargain for was the price of grain, only to have the sky itself tear open and rain fire upon your head. In the remote village of Buhari, located in Nigeria's Yobe State, a routine market day turned into a slaughterhouse within seconds. Was this a tragic mistake or a calculated strike gone wrong? Today, we unmask the chilling reality of when the protectors become the terminators. Deep within the Sahelian landscape of northeast Nigeria lies Unisori local government area. This is a land of resilience, where the sun beats down on communities that have survived decades of instability. Buhari village, a modest settlement near the border with Niger Republic, was supposed to be a safe haven. Here, life revolves around the weekly market, a vital pulse of trade and survival for thousands. But on this morning, that pulse was about to stop forever. Buhari village is a place where time seems to move slower, anchored by the rhythms of the seasons and the calls to prayer. On this specific morning, hundreds had gathered from surrounding hamlets to trade cattle, peppers, and handmade crafts. There was no warning, no siren, and no indication that the peace of this rural hub was about to be shattered by a force usually reserved for the deepest strongholds of notorious terror groups operating in the region. At approximately 10 in the morning, a low hum began to vibrate through the dry air. At first, the villagers thought it was just another routine patrol. The Nigerian Air Force frequently monitors this corridor to track the movements of Boko Haram and ISWAP militants. But as the hum grew into a deafening roar, the shadow of a fighter jet swept across the market square. In an instant, the routine surveillance mission turned into a kinetic strike of devastating proportions. The explosion was instantaneous. A thunderous clap silenced the chatter of the market, replaced by a wall of heat and flying debris. Shrapnel tore through the thin zinc roofs and wooden stalls like paper. In the immediate epicenter, there was only silence and a thick, choking cloud of grey smoke. Witnesses describe a scene of pure pandemonium as those who could still run scrambled for cover, leaving behind a landscape of abandoned goods and broken bodies. The survivors emerged from the dust to find a nightmare. Mothers searched frantically for children who had been playing near the stalls just moments before. Men used their bare hands to dig through the rubble of flattened buildings. The local clinic, barely equipped for minor ailments, was suddenly overwhelmed by victims with life-altering injuries. The air was thick with the scent of burnt rubber and copper, a grim reminder of the high-velocity metal that had just fallen from the clouds. Initial reports from the ground were harrowing. Local leaders and witnesses claimed that at least 9 people were killed instantly, with many more suffering from critical wounds. The casualties weren't combatants or insurgents, they were farmers, traders, and young children. As the news began to filter out of the remote region, the question on everyone's lips was the same: why would the military strike a known civilian hub in broad daylight? The search for answers would prove difficult. When the smoke cleared and the screams reached the capital in Abuja, the initial response from the Nigerian Air Force was a categorical denial. High-ranking officials claimed no jets were operational in that specific sector at the time of the reported blast. This gaslighting of a grieving community sparked outrage across the nation. Families were still burying their dead while being told that what they witnessed with their own eyes simply did not happen on that tragic day in September. However, the truth is hard to bury in the age of instant communication. Survivors began sharing photos of shrapnel and the large craters left in the earth. Local journalists risked their safety to travel to Buhari village, documenting the rows of fresh graves and the testimonies of the wounded in hospital beds. The weight of evidence became impossible to ignore. The Nigerian military, faced with mounting pressure from international human rights groups and local lawmakers, was forced to change its tune. Days later, the narrative shifted. The Air Force admitted that a jet had indeed been on a mission against terrorists in the area and that accidental civilian casualties might have occurred. This admission of friendly fire was cold comfort to the families who had lost their breadwinners. It highlighted a recurring and terrifying problem in the fight against insurgency: the thin line between precision strikes and catastrophic errors that turned the local population against the government forces meant to protect them. This was not an isolated incident in the long war against insurgency. From the 2017 bombing of a displaced persons camp in Ran to more recent strikes in Nasarawa and Kaduna, a pattern of accidental carnage has emerged. Each time, the military cites intelligence failures or the fog of war. Yet, for the civilians on the ground, These explanations offer little comfort as they continue to pay the ultimate price for tactical errors made by pilots thousands of feet above. The humanitarian cost of the Yobe strike extends far beyond the immediate deaths. In a region already crippled by food insecurity and poverty, the destruction of a central market is a death knell for the local economy. Traders lost their entire inventory, and farmers are now terrified to gather in large groups. This atmosphere of fear plays right into the hands of insurgents, who use such military blunders as a recruitment tool, claiming the state is an enemy of the people. Why do these mistakes keep happening? Military analysts point to a combination of aging equipment, inadequate real-time intelligence, and the immense pressure on pilots to eliminate high-value targets. In the vast, sparsely populated reaches of Yobe and Borno, distinguishing between a group of militants and a group of civilians from a high-altitude cockpit is a deadly challenge. But for the people of Buhari, the technical excuses do not bring back the fathers and daughters lost to the fire. The victims of the Yobe airstrike were individuals with dreams and stories. There was the elderly man who had spent 40 years building his trade, and the young mother who had traveled miles to buy medicine for her sick child. Their lives were ended not by the enemy they feared, but by the weapons of their own nation. The emotional toll on the community is a wound that may never fully heal, fostering a deep sense of betrayal and abandonment. The technical aspect of the strike suggests a failure in the chain of command. Targets are supposed to be vetted through multiple layers of intelligence before a trigger is pulled. In the Buhari incident, it appears these safeguards failed or were bypassed in the heat of the moment. This raises serious questions about the rules of engagement followed by the Nigerian military and whether enough is being done to modernize their targeting systems to prevent such horrific civilian casualties. Despite the tragedy, the resilience of the Yobe people remains unshaken. Within weeks, the villagers began the slow process of rebuilding. They cleared the charred remains of the market and erected new stalls, though the laughter that once filled the air has been replaced by a cautious silence. They continue to trade because they must, but their eyes are now constantly fixed on the horizon, listening for the sound of an engine that might signal another descent into chaos. When we compare the Buhari strike to the 2017 Ran bombing, where over 100 people were killed in a displacement camp, we see a recurring failure of accountability. In Ran, the government promised compensation and reforms, yet the lessons seem to have been forgotten by the time the jets arrived over Yobe. Without a transparent judicial process where military personnel are held accountable for negligence, these accidents will continue to happen, eroding the very foundation of national security. Transparency remains the biggest hurdle. The Nigerian government often keeps the findings of its internal investigations secret, citing national security. This lack of openness leaves victims' families in a state of perpetual limbo, unable to find closure or receive the financial reparations they were promised. The emotional toll on the families of Yobe is immeasurable. One survivor, who lost his brother in the strike, spoke of the constant nightmares that plagued the village. Every time a heavy truck rumbles by or a thunderstorm rolls in, children scream and hide, thinking the jets have returned. The psychological trauma of being bombed by your own government is a burden no child should have to carry, yet it is the reality for many in Nigeria's northeast. Today, Yobe State exists in a precarious balance. On one hand, the military is essential for repelling the very real threat of terrorist insurgents who have caused untold suffering. On the other hand, the military's own actions have sometimes caused just as much grief for innocent civilians. Finding a way to provide security without sacrificing the lives of the innocent is the greatest challenge facing the Nigerian state today. The ghost of Buhari village demand that a better way be found. The international community has also weighed in, with organizations like Amnesty International calling for an independent inquiry into the Yobe airstrike. They argue that as long as the military investigates itself, the full truth will never come to light. Pressure from global partners is crucial, as Nigeria receives significant military aid and hardware from overseas. These donors have a responsibility to ensure their technology is not being used to inadvertently target the very civilians it is meant to protect. Seeking justice for the victims of Buhari village is not just about money, it is about dignity. It is about the government looking its citizens in the eye and saying, "Your lives matter." Until there is a public apology and a clear plan to prevent future strikes, the bond between the people and the state will remain fractured. The tragedy in Yobe serves as a grim warning of what happens when the machinery of war loses its human focus. War is never clean, but it should never be blind. The lessons of the Yobe airstrike must be etched into the training manuals of every pilot and commander. The fight against terror cannot be won if the cost is the trust and the lives of the people being liberated. As Nigeria continues to battle for its soul in the northeast, it must remember that every civilian life lost to friendly fire is a victory for the very insurgents they seek to defeat. The tragedy in Yobe remains a haunting reminder of the thin line between security and catastrophe. As we look toward the future of Nigeria, the voices of the victims in Buhari village must never be silenced by the roar of jet engines. We must demand accountability to ensure that the sky remains a source of rain and life, not fire and death. Thank you for watching this deep dive. Please subscribe and share to keep these untold African stories alive.